This video is brought to you in part by Incogni. The Olympics. The 2024 Paris Olympics are almost upon us, or are currently happening, or are already over, depending on how quickly I make this video. This year's games will be the 33rd Olympiad, the first modern Olympics having been in 1896. But what of the ancient games? The Olympic Games aren't just the biggest international sporting event of modern times, but a tradition with a history over 2,000 years. So in this video, let's take a trip back in time to the ancient Olympics. Have you ever noticed that when you sign up to a store's loyalty program or make an account with some random website, that you suddenly start getting a bunch more spam emails? Well, this is because these companies can sell your information to other companies called data brokers. They in turn sell your information to advertisers, and next thing you know, your spam folder is fit to bursting. Basically, your personal information, like your email and phone number, are out there on the internet, and this data is being published and sold online without you knowing about it, and without your permission. The good news is that you have the right to privacy, and these data brokers have to delete your information if you request it. But to do that personally would take years, and you'd have to redo the whole process every few months. The solution? Incogni. Incogni reaches out to data brokers on your behalf, requests your personal data removal, and deals with any objections from their side. And they repeat this process whenever your personal info is published again. All you have to do is create an account, agree to let them work for you, and observe as they go to work protecting your privacy online. So click the link in the description, or in the pinned comment, or just go to the address you see on the screen right now to sign up. Thanks to Incogni for sponsoring, and now back to the video. The ancient Olympics were a sporting event in the ancient Greek world that happened, like the modern games, every 4 years, and lasted for over a millennium. The games were not simply an athletic competition, but more importantly a religious festival. It was a festival dedicated to Zeus, the king of the gods in ancient Greek religion. In fact, the games were the most important religious festival of all in the ancient Greek world, with the only competition being the Eleusinian Mysteries. The games were so important that they were used as a basis for the Greek calendar. The Olympics were held, naturally, at Olympia, a sacred site and temple complex in the western Peloponnese. For most of its history, Olympia was controlled by the city-state of Elis. Most of the time, Olympia was pretty empty, but when the games were on, it would fill with athletes, spectators, politicians, philosophers, and merchants. During the height of the games, which was actually in Roman times, there were said to be as many as 40,000 spectators at any given Olympics. Here's a map of the site. At the center, we see the Temple of Zeus. Inside the temple was a large statue of the god, which was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Over here is the temple to Hera, queen of the gods and wife of Zeus. And behind that was a smaller temple to Rhea, the mother of them both. There was the Tholos of Philippos, a shrine built by King Philip II, Alexander the Great's father. The running track was over here and the horse track out here. On the other side was the Gymnasion, used as a training ground for the athletes, and next to it were the wrestling grounds called the Palestra. Hotels were over here, and Roman baths were nearby. The famed philosopher Aristotle claimed that the very first Olympic Games were held in the year 776 BC. Other ancient Greek historians seem to agree, and modern archaeology generally confirms this date. The Greeks themselves rooted the Games in their mythology. There were multiple myths about the origins of the Olympics. 2 popular ones presented the Olympics as funerary games. One story saw Zeus himself start the games as both a celebration of the defeat of his tyrannical father Kronos, and a festival honoring him. Another story says that the hero Pelops started the games in honor of his father-in-law, whom he had killed, Oenomaus. My personal favorite myth comes from the writer Pausanias. When Zeus was born, his mother Rhea and grandmother Gaia hid him away on an island from his father Kronos, who had eaten Zeus's 5 older siblings. While Zeus was being raised by nymphs on this faraway island, 5 dactyl men were left to watch him. The dactyls were a race of men in mythology that were associated with Rhea and show up in multiple myths. Anyway, as a way to entertain their future lord, the 5 men set up a foot race. When they were done, Zeus was pleased and cut a branch from a nearby olive tree, fashioned it into a wreath, and used that to crown the winner. The actual winners of the ancient Olympics were likewise crowned with olive wreaths. So those are some mythological origins the Greeks gave to their games, but what about the historical origins? Well, the first Olympics were in 776 BC. We don't know how it started exactly, but we do know it was a religious festival for Zeus and that it consisted of only one event, a short foot race. The winner of the first Olympics was recorded as Corybos of Elis. The games were held every 4 years after this one, and as time went on, the Olympics grew in both importance and in the number of events. Competitors in the ancient Olympics had to be free Greek men. No slaves, women, or non-Greeks were allowed to compete. Later on in Roman times, the ethnic requirements were laxed, and competitors only had to speak Greek. Women were not allowed to participate. That said, in the equestrian events, women were able to enter their horses, and the owners of victorious horses were considered victors along with the riders. This led to several women winning wreaths in the Olympic Games. Most famously, Cynisca, Princess of Sparta, entered horses for the chariot races and won 2 consecutive Olympiads in 396 and 392 BC. Famously, the athletes all performed nude, and only the best athletes could participate in the games. Olympic hopefuls were required to come a month early for preliminary competitions in Elis, and those who won in those preliminary heats were given the honor of competing in the games for real. So what about the spectators? We don't know how many people were at the first Olympic Games, but we do know that by its height in the 2nd century AD, the Olympics could pull as many as 40,000 people. And who were these people? Well, most were men. In fact, some sources say that only men could spectate, but from what I can gather, this seems untrue. Women could be spectators, but only if they were unmarried. I guess the idea being that a married woman should only look at her husband naked, not a bunch of young, buff athletes. Unfortunate but predictable patriarchal rules aside, the spectators of the ancient Olympics seemed to be all sorts of people. Merchants would come to sell their wares, politicians and officials would show up and often participate, priests and priestesses would of course be there, as it was a religious festival. We even know that philosophers would show up and preach their ideas to anyone who would listen. The Olympics started as only a foot race. The race was called the Stadion, and it was a sprint of 600 ancient feet, about 193 meters, so something like our modern 200-meter dash. This race continued to be the most important event in the Olympics, with the winner being recorded for all time. In 724 BC, a longer race called the Dialos was added. It was twice as far as the Stadion. Over time, more and more events were added till a total of around 18 were included. Keep in mind that not all Olympic Games hosted all 18 events concurrently, and starting in 632 BC, youth events were added, so really, there were around 9 or 10 individual sports. After the Dialos, they added the Dolikos, the longest run in the ancient Olympics. How long it was is actually somewhat unclear, as athletes ran all around the temple complex, and we don't know which path they took, or how many laps they ran. But sources say it was between 10 and 20 stadion races, so between 2,000 and 4,000 meters, with most sources agreeing it was closer to the 4,000 meter mark. Wrestling was added in 708 BC. Unlike modern Greco-Roman wrestling, sweeps and trips of the legs were allowed. To win a bout, a wrestler needed to throw their opponent to the ground 3 times. The pentathlon was the only mixed event in the games. Competitors had to compete in 5 sports, hence the name pentathlon, and these events were long jump, discus throw, stadion race, javelin throw, and wrestling. All the events were completed in one day, and it's unclear how the winner was chosen. Boxing was added in 688 BC. Athletes wore leather straps on their hands, not to protect their opponents, but to protect their knuckles. This event was the most violent of all the sports. Serious injury was not uncommon, and death was not unheard of. One of the most popular events was the 4-horse chariot race, called the Tithrippon. Riders raced for 12 laps around the track, called the Hippodrome. Later, in 408 BC, a two-horse chariot race was added. There was also a horse race called the Keles. Riders raced for 6 laps around the track. Last of the equestrian events were the Epine, a chariot race with 2 mules, and the Calpe, a trotting horse race for mares. These last 2 events were actually dropped in 444 BC. In 648 BC, pancration was added. It was the MMA of its time, combining both boxing and wrestling, and the fighters were allowed to kick as well. In fact, the only rules were that fighters could not bite their opponents or gouge their eyes. Funnily enough, boxing was still considered the most dangerous sport, because the boxers often put metal plates in their leather straps, while pancration was fought barehanded. Either way, both sports were seriously dangerous, with deaths occurring, albeit infrequently, in both sports. Lastly was the Hoplite-Dromos. Added in 520 BC, this was a race the length of 4 stadions in full hoplite armor, including a shield and spear. This event became very popular, and it always closed out the games. You might be wondering, where's the marathon? Well, while the marathon does have its origins in ancient Greece, it was not an event at the Olympics. It comes from the legend of Philippides, who was said to have run the distance from Marathon to Athens in a day to deliver a message, that the Greeks had defeated the Persians in the Battle of Marathon. Or maybe he ran from Athens to Sparta to deliver a message. It depends on the version you read. The point is, he ran a long way and died after delivering the message. The first marathon race, however, was in modern times. The ancient Olympic Games existed for 1,169 years. The Games peaked during Roman rule in the 2nd century, but ended a few hundred years after its peak. Why did this happen? Well, you can blame Emperor Theodosius and the spread of Christianity. Emperor Theodosius was a Christian emperor, his reign being around 70 years after Constantine's conversion to the Christian faith. While Theodosius didn't outlaw paganism outright, as many early Christian historians seem to claim, he did support and endorse Christianity throughout the empire. We don't really know what happened that ended the Olympics. It is a commonly seen factoid that Theodosius outlawed pagan practice, and this included the games. But again, modern history doesn't quite support that view. It could be that the Olympics simply declined and ended during this time, and it had little to do with the emperor, and more with the changing religious landscape of the empire in general. Either way, the last recorded Olympics were in 393 AD. The idea of reviving the Olympic Games came about in the late 19th century. Many people tried, but the one to succeed was a Frenchman named Baron Pierre de Coubertin. He was a French aristocrat and physical education enthusiast. His first cause was to increase phys ed in French schools, but apparently he failed, so he turned his sights towards reviving the Olympic Games. As I said, the idea had already been going around, so it wasn't hard to drum up support. And so the first Olympic Congress was held in 1894 with representatives from 9 countries, mostly across Europe. Baron Coubertin wanted the first Olympics to be in his home country of France, in Paris, but the other members of the committee convinced him that the first really should be in Greece. So the first modern games were held in Athens in 1896, with the second games being held in Paris in 1900. The first games were relatively small, but it produced a lot of support and publicity. It included only male athletes from 14 countries who competed in 43 events. There were 241 athletes and over 2,000 spectators. Women were first included in the 1900 Olympics, and the first Winter Olympics were held in 1924 in Chamonix, France. And the rest, as they say, is history. Thanks for watching my video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you enjoyed the 2024 Olympics. What sport do you think should be included in future Olympic Games? I think they should bring back chariot racing. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and please consider supporting the channel on Patreon. The link is in the description. Bye!